tragic story of Hope, Melton and the sheriff who failed her. Imagine making a terrified phone call to your grandmother saying someone's following you, and that being the last time anyone ever hears your voice. On December 26th, 2011, just one day after Christmas, that's exactly what happened to 30-year-old Hope Melton in quiet Kershaw, South Carolina. But this isn't just a story about a tragic murder. It's about how the very person meant to solve the crime, the county sheriff himself, would end up betraying not just Hope's family, but his entire community. From a gas station stalker to a corrupt sheriff running his jail like a personal kingdom, this story will show you how justice can be stolen twice. Before we dive into this shocking real story that changed a small town forever, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Ring that notification bell too, because we share stories that expose the darkness hiding in America's small towns. Now, let's go back to that cold December day when Hope Melton made her final call. The last time anyone heard Hope Melton's voice, it was trembling with fear. On a crisp December afternoon in 2011, just one day after Christmas, the 30-year-old's desperate call to her grandmother would become the beginning of a nightmare that would shake the quiet community of Kershaw, South Carolina to its core. Someone's following me. Those three words, spoken in hushed panic over a rural stretch of highway, would be Hope's final message to her family. The call cut off abruptly, leaving only static and questions in its wake. Hope Beverly Roscoe Melton wasn't just another statistic. A 2000 honor graduate of Chesterfield High School, she had been a bright presence in her community, teaching children's church at Lancaster Church of God, managing the T&T Country Store in McBee, and recently celebrating her first wedding anniversary with Gary Lee Melton. Their dreams of starting a family would never materialize. That December 26th began ordinarily enough. Hope set out to visit her grandmother, a routine 30-mile drive she'd made countless times before. She was expected for lunch, but instead of her arrival, her grandmother received that chilling phone call. What followed was a mother's worst nightmare. Hope's mother and grandmother frantically driving the rural roads, their hearts stopping when they spotted Hope's abandoned vehicle on a desolate stretch of country road 5 miles from their destination. The 911 call they made should have triggered an immediate emergency response. Instead, it was processed as a routine missing person case, engsub, a critical misstep that would later prove devastating. The subsequent investigation would reveal not only the power of modern surveillance technology through CCTV footage, but also expose troubling failures within local law enforcement that would ultimately impact the case's outcome. Time is always the enemy in missing persons cases. Every minute that ticks by after the initial report decreases the chances of finding the victim alive. In Hope's case, those precious minutes were already slipping away as her family stood beside her empty car, waiting for help to arrive. The winter sun was already beginning to fade when Sheriff's Deputy James Wilson arrived at the scene, his cruiser's tires crunching over the gravel shoulder where Hope's vehicle sat abandoned. The 2008 silver Honda Civic was perfectly aligned with the road's edge, no skid marks, no signs of struggle in the surrounding gravel. The car's pristine condition immediately struck Wilson as odd. In his 15 years of service, he'd learned that unplanned stops rarely looked this neat. "Pop the trunk," Wilson called out to the evidence technicians who had arrived moments after him. The forensics team worked methodically, photographing every inch of the vehicle's exterior before processing the interior. Hope's brown leather purse sat undisturbed on the passenger seat, its contents scattered as if someone had rifled through them in haste. The missing wallet spoke volumes. This wasn't looking like a simple disappearance. The rural landscape surrounding them seemed to swallow sound, broken only by the crackle of police radios and the distant barking of search dogs. As volunteers began arriving in pickup trucks and ATVs, Gary Melton's truck came tearing down the road, kicking up dust. Hope's husband of just 13 months stumbled out, his face ashen. Detective Sarah Martinez, newly assigned to the case, watched as he struggled to maintain composure while answering their questions. "She always stops for gas on this route," Gary managed to say, his voice cracking. "She's particular about it, likes to keep her tank above half full." This seemingly mundane detail provided the investigators their first actionable lead in what was rapidly evolving into a potential abduction case. Martinez pulled out a county map, spreading it across the hood of her unmarked car. The route from Hope's house to her grandmother's covered approximately 30 miles of mostly rural roads, with 4 gas stations dotting the landscape like lonely sentinels. Each would need to be checked, surveillance footage reviewed, employees interviewed, receipts examined. The first station, a weathered quick stop just off Route 341, seemed promising with its newly installed security system. The manager, Earl Jenkins, led Detective Martinez into a cramped back office where monitors displayed feeds from 6 different cameras. The detective settled in for what she knew would be a painstaking review of the footage. At 12:19 p.m., the cameras captured a male customer entering the store. Nothing unusual about his behavior, but Martinez noted it in her log anyway. Experience had taught her that even the most innocuous details could become crucial later. 3 minutes later, a tall woman in workout clothes appeared on screen. For a moment, Martinez's heart rate spiked, but the woman's height, clearly several inches above Hope's 5'5" frame, quickly ruled her out. The footage continued rolling. 12:30, 12:35, 12:40. Each passing minute felt like a weight being added to Martinez's shoulders. By 12:45, she knew they'd struck out at this location. Hope Melton had never entered this station. Outside, the search was intensifying. The winter air carried the sounds of ATVs and search teams calling Hope's name into the gathering dust. Her family huddled together near their vehicles, clutching cups of gas station coffee that had long since gone cold. Martinez could see them trading theories, grasping at increasingly unlikely scenarios. Maybe she'd gotten stuck and accepted a ride. Maybe she'd had car trouble and walked to find help. The detective recognized this phase of a missing persons case, the desperate need to believe in best-case scenarios, even as experience suggested otherwise. 10 miles down the road, the second gas station waited. A Shell station with flickering fluorescent lights and an ancient security system. As Martinez pulled into the parking lot, her phone buzzed with an update from the forensics team. No signs of forced entry on Hope's car, no blood, no obvious signs of struggle, but something about this case was setting off every alarm bell in her veteran investigator's mind. Time was running out, and she knew it. The Shell station's manager was already waiting by the door, keys in hand. Maybe this time, Martinez thought, they'd find what they were looking for. Maybe this would be the break they needed to bring Hope Melton home. Detective Martinez pulled into the Shell station's lot just as sheets of winter clouds dimmed the afternoon light. The station's manager, Tom Baker, was already waiting, having received the alert about a missing woman from County Dispatch. Before Martinez could finish describing Hope, Baker's face changed. Blonde lady, pink shirt? Yeah, she was here around noon. Sweet girl. Said Merry Christmas when she paid. Martinez's pulse quickened. The first solid lead. The security setup was basic, 4 cameras, grainy footage, but it was enough. The outdoor camera caught Hope's Honda pulling up to pump number 3 at 12:03 p.m. She moved with the easy confidence of someone having a normal day. No indication she was just minutes away from making that terrified phone call to her grandmother. Stop! Martinez ordered when the footage showed a dark minivan entering the frame. The vehicle glided to a halt near pump number 4, and a man in a white baseball cap emerged. Something about his movements made Martinez lean closer to the screen. He wasn't there for gas. The interior camera footage told a story in fragments. The man holding the door for Hope, a gesture that should have been courteous, but somehow felt predatory through the lens of hindsight. Hope, completely unaware, smiling as she paid for her gas. But it was the man's eyes that caught Martinez's attention. The way they followed Hope's every movement, calculating, assessing. Run it back, Martinez instructed Baker. Let's see that minivan again. The exterior footage revealed the vehicle's make, likely a Dodge Caravan late 90s model, but the angle obscured the license plate. Martinez watched as Hope drove away, heading north toward her grandmother's house. The minivan waited exactly 47 seconds before pulling out after her. Martinez's hand instinctively went to her phone. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. The predatory behavior, the calculated pursuit. Her years working sex crimes told her they were dealing with something far worse. I need every receipt from noon to 1, she told Baker. Credit card transactions, security stills of that cap, anything you've got, and I need them now. As Baker hurried to comply, Martinez studied the last frame of Hope driving away, unknowingly followed by the dark shadow of the minivan. The timestamp read 12:11 p.m. In less than an hour, Hope would make that final, frightened call to her grandmother. The race against time had just become even more. Detective Martinez had been staring at the surveillance monitors for so long that every vehicle began to blur together, until something caught her eye. A flash of gray metal. Another car had pulled into the station just as Hope was leaving. Its driver's attention seemed fixed on Hope's departing Honda, but he made no move to follow. Martinez's instincts told her there was more to see. Let's go back to the beginning, she muttered, rewinding the footage once again. That's when she saw it. an orange Chevrolet she'd somehow missed in her previous viewing. The vehicle's movements were too precise to be casual, cutting across the parking lot in a way that gave it a clear view of Hope's car while maintaining distance. As Hope pulled onto the highway, the Chevy followed. While Martinez was piecing together the surveillance puzzle, her radio crackled to life. The search team had found something that made her blood run cold. A pink bracelet, still showing signs of struggle where it had broken, and nearby, a blanket stained with what appeared to be blood. When Gary Melton arrived to identify the bracelet, his hands shook as he held it. "I just gave her this for Christmas," he choked out, "just yesterday." The discovery transformed the investigation. What started as a missing person case was now showing all the hallmarks of a violent crime. Martinez needed to confirm the orange Chevy's pursuit wasn't coincidental. The next potential camera location was an office complex along Hope's route to her grandmother's house. The building stood dark and empty, closed for the holidays. After a series of increasingly urgent phone calls, Martinez finally reached Barbara Chen, the office manager, who arrived 20 minutes later looking concerned. "Our system only records on motion detection," Chen explained as they navigated the building's security room, "but it should have caught any traffic on the main road." Martinez settled in front of the monitors once again, this time watching footage from 12:06 p.m. Hope's Honda appeared first, moving at normal highway speed. Then, 2 seconds later, there it was, the orange Chevrolet maintaining the same calculated distance it had kept since the gas station. "Stop there," Martinez ordered, leaning closer to the screen. The vehicle's distinctive paint job caught the winter sun, making it stand out against the gray asphalt. "Can you enhance this section?" As Chen worked the controls, Martinez's mind raced through the timeline. Hope was still alive at this point, still 20 minutes away from making that desperate call to her grandmother. Somewhere between this camera and her abandoned car, something had gone terribly wrong. "Send this footage to forensics," Martinez directed. "I need every frame analyzed, every detail about that Chevy documented." She checked her watch. 4:45 p.m. Daylight was fading, and with it, their chances of finding Hope alive. The surveillance footage left no doubt. The orange Chevy stalked Hope's Honda through the rural landscape, maintaining a calculated distance that spoke of experience. Not close enough to alarm, but never letting her slip away. As Hope's car disappeared into the forested road where it would later be found abandoned, the Chevy followed like a predator tracking its prey. The APB crackled across police frequencies throughout Jefferson County. By late afternoon, Officer Derek Thompson spotted the distinctive orange Chevrolet crawling through Jefferson's side streets. Behind the wheel sat 23-year-old Nicholas Miller, a local whose nervousness radiated through his windshield even before Thompson activated his light. In the station's interrogation room, Miller's behavior set off every red flag in Detective Martinez's arsenal of experience. His answers slithered around direct questions, each response carefully constructed to reveal nothing while appearing cooperative. When asked about his whereabouts, Miller offered what seemed like an airtight alibi: morning shopping at a Walmart 30 miles away. "Get me those tapes," Martinez ordered, already sensing something wasn't right. The Walmart security office was a maze of monitors and hard drives. Loss prevention officer Janet Keene pulled up the morning footage with practiced efficiency. At first glance, Miller's story checked out. His orange Chevy arrived at 10 a.m. and security cameras captured him entering the store. But as Martinez studied the footage, a disturbing pattern emerged. Miller moved through the store with an unsettling awareness, his path seemingly random, but his eyes constantly scanning. No shopping cart, no basket, no list, just methodical movement through the aisle. "Stop there, Mom," Martinez commanded, pointing to a frame where Miller paused near the women's clothing section. "Roll back 30 seconds. The footage revealed what her trained eye had caught. Miller wasn't shopping. He was hunting. His movements mirrored those of a predator: strategic positioning, careful observation, patient waiting. The store was just a hunting ground, and Miller was practicing. "Pull up all the camera angles from this section," Martinez instructed. "I want to see everyone he interacts with or watches." As the footage rolled, a chilling portrait began to emerge, one that suggested Nicholas Miller's encounter with Hope Melton might not have been his first attempt at stalking prey. The Walmart footage revealed a darker truth with each passing frame. Miller's movements through the store took on a predatory pattern, not the random wandering of a shopper, but the calculated stalking of a hunter. His target, a blonde woman who, absorbed in her shopping, had no idea she was being followed. Martinez watched Miller's technique with growing revulsion. He maintained the perfect distance, close enough to strike if an opportunity arose, far enough to avoid suspicion. His eyes never left the woman as she moved through the aisles, his body language a study in predatory patience. This wasn't his first time. Track his eye line, Martinez instructed the security officer. Note every time he positions himself for a clear view of her. The woman's salvation appeared in the form of a man, presumably her husband or partner, joining her in the household goods aisle. The change in Miller's demeanor was immediate and telling. His shoulders tensed, his path became erratic, and within minutes he abandoned his pursuit. The couple left the store, blissfully unaware of the danger they'd narrowly avoided. Miller's exit from Walmart was revealing, his body language screaming frustration, hands clenched, movements sharp and aggressive. The timestamp showed 11:15 a.m. Less than an hour later, he would encounter Hope Melton at that fateful gas station. The search warrant for Miller's orange Chevy yielded devastating evidence. Crime scene technician Sarah Cooper spotted it first. A distinctive blood spatter pattern on the passenger side fender, consistent with medium-velocity impact. More blood traces marked the driver's side bumper, telling a silent story of violence. When they found Hope's wallet tucked under the front seat, the last sliver of doubt evaporated. "Document everything," Martinez ordered. "Every drop, every fiber, every print. This is our crime scene." The second interrogation took place in a small room at the Chesterfield County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Sam Parker insisted on conducting it himself, despite protocol suggesting otherwise, a decision that would later prove catastrophic to the case. Parker's approach lacked the subtle psychological manipulation needed for such delicate interviews. Miller began with standard denials, his responses practiced and controlled, but when confronted with the blood evidence and wallet, something changed in his demeanor. The facade cracked, revealing glimpses of something dark and primitive underneath. "I'll show you where she is," he finally said, his voice devoid of emotion. The drive to the turkey farm was conducted in a tense convoy of police vehicles. Miller directed them through a maze of back roads, each turn taking them further into isolation. 14 miles from Hope's abandoned car, he signaled for them to stop. The scene that awaited them would haunt even the most seasoned investigators. Hope lay exposed on the cold ground, positioned in a way that suggested final degradation. Detective Martinez, who had seen her share of crime scenes, had to turn away for a moment. The brutal reality of what Hope had endured in her final hours was written in every detail of the scene. Crime scene technicians worked methodically, documenting every aspect while fighting their own emotional responses. The winter wind carried the sound of someone retching in the bushes, a rookie officer overwhelmed by his first major crime scene. As the sun set over the turkey farm, casting long shadows across the horrific tableau, Martinez couldn't help but think about the Walmart footage, about the other woman who had escaped this fate simply because she wasn't alone, about how easily Hope could have been saved if someone had noticed Miller's predatory behavior sooner. In the stark fluorescent light of the interrogation room, Nicholas Miller sat hollow-eyed and empty, unable or unwilling to explain the darkness that had driven him to destroy Hope Melton's life. When pressed for a motive, he would only stare at his hands, as if the answers might be written there in invisible ink. The task of informing Hope's family fell to Detective Martinez. No amount of experience could prepare anyone for such a moment. She watched Gary Melton collapse into his mother-in-law's arms, their shared grief too profound for words. The happy Christmas photos on their walls, taken just days before, now seemed like artifacts from another lifetime. Through extensive interviews and investigation, a pattern began to emerge. Miller's ex-girlfriend, Jessica Torres, painted a picture of a man unraveling. Their breakup 3 weeks earlier had sent him into a spiral, but there were signs of instability long before that. "He would follow me sometimes," Torres told investigators, her hand shaking as she pulled up photos on her phone. "I thought he was just being possessive, you know? I didn't realize." Her voice trailed off as she showed them the images. Her car in various locations, the orange Chevy lurking in the background. The last photos were time-stamped just hours before Hope's abduction. The timeline of Hope's final hours emerged with devastating clarity. Security footage showed her at the gas pump, smiling slightly, perhaps thinking about the lunch waiting at her grandmother's. Miller, watching from his car, made his decision in that moment. The randomness of it was perhaps the most chilling aspect. Hope's fate sealed by nothing more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The attack itself was swift and brutal. On that secluded road, Hope had just enough time to make that desperate call before Miller forced her car off the road. In his confession, he described the events with a detachment that chilled even veteran investigators. The baseball bat was already in his trunk, a detail that suggested premeditation, despite his claims of spontaneity. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case emerged through the investigation into Sheriff Sam Parker's conduct. As details of his corruption came to light, they cast a shadow over the entire investigation. Parker's mismanagement of the sheriff's office went far beyond simple corruption. It was a systematic breakdown of law enforcement integrity. The list of Parker's transgressions grew longer with each day of investigation. He had transformed the jail into his personal fiefdom, trading favors with inmates for personal gain. Two prisoners, Michael Lee and William Skipper, lived in a mobile home outside the jail, essentially serving as Parker's personal workforce. They were given access to cars, weapons, and even badges, creating a dangerous parallel power structure within the county. The old armory at Chesterfield County Jail wasn't what most would expect from a detention facility. Instead of cold concrete and steel bars, it had become a bizarre luxury suite for select inmates, complete with internet access, personal phones, and a revolving door of unsupervised visitors. But perhaps the most shocking aspect wasn't the amenities themselves, but rather who had authorized them. Sheriff Sam Parker, the very man sworn to uphold the law. As prosecutors would later reveal, the armory was just the tip of an iceberg of corruption that had transformed this small South Carolina jail into what locals would come to call Parker's Kingdom. Under his watch, favored inmates enjoyed privileges that seemed more fitting for a five-star resort than a county jail: shopping trips to local stores, dining excursions at restaurants, and even private parties, all with the sheriff's explicit blessing. The price for such extraordinary treatment? Labor. Inmates became Parker's personal workforce, performing renovations and maintenance on his private property. It was a modern-day version of a feudal system, with Parker as the lord and his chosen inmates as his privileged servants. Among these favored few was Mike Lee, serving a 15-year sentence for arson. During Parker's trial, Lee's testimony would paint a picture so extraordinary that it seemed almost fictional. His cell, if one could even call it that, boasted amenities that many law-abiding citizens couldn't afford: flat-screen TVs, a personal refrigerator, and a premium mattress. While other inmates wore standard-issue jumpsuits, Lee dressed in civilian clothes purchased with money from his family. He didn't just eat jail food. He shared meals with deputies as if they were colleagues rather than captors. Lee's privileges extended far beyond the jail walls. From his position at one of the county's impound lots, he maintained an active social media presence and used phones freely, privileges explicitly denied to normal inmates for security reasons. But the most stunning development came when Lee was moved to the sheriff's armory, where the lines between incarceration and freedom became almost indistinguishable. It was in this armory that Lee hosted what might be one of the most surreal events in American corrections history: his own birthday party. Picture the scene: an inmate serving time for arson, entertaining guests with filet mignon and alcohol within the walls of a law enforcement facility. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on investigators, who would later piece together the extent of Parker's corrupt regime. But even this paled in comparison to what came next. Lee's testimony revealed that he had been permitted to take a private jet from Cheraw to Mount Pleasant to visit his family, an unprecedented level of freedom for someone serving a 15-year sentence. On another occasion, a deputy drove Lee and another inmate in a marked sheriff's car to Florence for a lunch date with a female friend, treating the department's vehicles as a personal taxi service for inmates. The relationship between Lee and Parker grew increasingly personal over time. Lee became a regular at Parker's home, not as an inmate, but almost as a family friend. They attended church together, and Lee even gave gifts to Parker's daughter, creating a bizarre dynamic that blurred the lines between law enforcer and law. This kingdom of corruption couldn't last forever. In 2014, justice finally caught up with Sheriff Parker. The trial revealed a system so corrupt that it shocked even veteran law enforcement officials. The final verdict was decisive. Parker was found guilty on 8 counts, including 5 counts of misconduct in office, 2 counts of providing contraband to inmates, and 1 count of embezzlement. The sentencing seemed almost ironic: 2 years in prison with the possibility of parole for a man who had turned his jail into a personal fiefdom. Parker would now experience incarceration from the other side, though it's unlikely his stay would include the luxuries he so freely provided to his favored inmate. The case would become a stark reminder of how power, when left unchecked, can corrupt even those sworn to uphold the law. It raised troubling questions about oversight in small-town law enforcement and the systems that allowed such flagrant abuse to continue for years before anyone intervened. The legacy of Parker's Kingdom serves as a cautionary tale in law enforcement circles, a reminder that the thin blue line between order and chaos can sometimes be erased by those holding the very badge meant to protect it. The story of Chesterfield County Jail under Sheriff Parker's reign remains one of the most bizarre chapters in modern American law enforcement history, a testament to how quickly justice can be corrupted when power goes unchecked. In the hushed courtroom, former Sheriff Sam Parker's voice trembled as he faced the consequences of his actions. Tears welled in his eyes as he addressed the people of Chesterfield County, the very citizens he had sworn to protect but ultimately betrayed. His apologies echoed off the courthouse walls, directed at his family, friends, and fellow law enforcement officers. But there was one apology conspicuously absent, one that would haunt another family forever. What few in the courtroom that day realized was how Parker's corruption had reached far beyond the bizarre privileges he'd granted to inmates. Its tendrils had wrapped around something far more sinister: the Hope Melton murder case. In a cruel twist of fate, the same sheriff who had turned his jail into a personal fiefdom had also irreparably damaged the prosecution of one of the county's most horrific crimes. During his interrogation of Nicholas Miller, Parker had made a fatal mistake, or perhaps demonstrated the same casual disregard for proper procedure that had characterized his entire tenure. He had promised Miller something no sheriff had the authority to guarantee: immunity from the death penalty in exchange for a confession. It was a promise that would come back to haunt not Parker, but Hope Melton's grieving family. Solicitor Dan Johnson's official statement laid bare the devastating impact of Parker's actions. Sheriff Parker severely jeopardized the case, Johnson declared, explaining how the illegal promise of leniency had tainted Miller's confession. Any statements made under such circumstances would be suppressed at trial, a prosecutor's nightmare and a victim's family's worst fear. The ramifications became clear in March 2015 when 26-year-old Nicholas Miller stood before the court. His guilty plea to all charges resulted in a life sentence without the possibility of parole, a severe punishment by any measure, but not the ultimate penalty Hope's family had sought. The courtroom that day told a tale of two justices, one corrupted by power and another forever altered by that corruption. Elizabeth Melton, Hope's mother, spoke with barely contained fury about their disappointment, a word that seemed inadequate to capture the depth of their pain. The family had hoped for the death penalty, believing it to be the only punishment that could match the magnitude of their loss. Instead, they found themselves victims not only of Miller's actions, but of Parker's misconduct. Perhaps most telling was the family's continued wait for an apology from Parker, a wait that seemed to symbolize the broader injustice they had endured. While Parker had found tears for his own family's embarrassment, he had offered no words of remorse to the family whose quest for justice he had compromised. The tragic irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very man who had led investigators to Hope's body had also been the one to ensure her killer would never face the ultimate punishment. Parker's corruption had created a ripple effect, touching not just the inmates he had improperly favored, but reaching into the heart of a murder investigation and affecting a grieving family's chance at what they considered full justice. Today, the Melton family continues their fight, not just for justice, but to keep Hope's memory alive. Their struggle has become a testament to the far-reaching consequences of corruption in law enforcement, showing how one official's misconduct can create wounds that extend far beyond the immediate scope of their crimes. The intersecting stories of Sheriff Parker's corruption and Hope Melton's murder serve as a somber reminder that justice is a delicate mechanism, one that can be derailed not only by those who break the law, but by those entrusted to uphold it. In Chesterfield County, these two cases became inextricably linked, forever changing the meaning of justice for one family and highlighting the devastating ripple effects when law enforcement betrays its fundamental duties. The legacy of these intertwined cases continues to resonate through the halls of South Carolina's justice system, a stark reminder that corruption in law enforcement doesn't just compromise the integrity of the system, it can rob victims and their families of the justice they deserve. While Parker served his brief sentence and Miller remains behind bars for life, the Melton family's wait for complete closure continues, a wait extended indefinitely by the very person who should have been their strongest advocate for justice.